I stood in the freezing shadows of the deck, watching my life play out through triple-pane glass. Inside, the fire roared. My father raised a crystal flute to a room full of strangers. "We worked 40 years for this view," he boomed, beaming at my sister Brittany. "And we are so glad our daughter finally has a home worthy of her." I waited for my name. It never came. Then through the cracked sliding door I heard my mother's voice, sharp and dismissive. "Well, what is done is done. Lauren bought it, but it is ours now. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." I did not storm the glass. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfaction of a scene they could later describe as hysterical. I simply turned around my boots, silent on the frosted decking, and walked back to my sedan parked down the unlit driveway. Inside the car, the air was dead still. My breath hung in white clouds before me. I looked at my hands. They were steady, not a tremor. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a tear, a pang of grief, anything that resembled a normal human reaction to watching your own parents erase you from existence. But there was nothing, no grief, no panic, just a cold, hard clarity that felt like the click of a lock snapping shut. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled out my laptop. The screen glowed to life, casting a blue light over the dashboard. I navigated past my work files, past the forensic audits I did for Fortune 500 companies, and opened a file I had named simply the Family Ledger. Most people think love is unconditional. They think family is a bond that transcends logic. But when you grow up the way I did, as the invisible support beam keeping a crumbling house standing, you learn that love is actually a transaction. It is a commodity. You learn to quantify your existence because if you do not, you will be consumed. I call it the invisible ledger of the survivor. I started keeping it when I was 12 years old. I tracked every time I cleaned up my sister Brittany's messes so my parents would smile at me. I tracked every dollar of my allowance I spent on my mother's birthday gifts, hoping to buy a moment of her undivided attention. I viewed my relationship with them as a high-risk investment. I poured resources in time, money, obedience, silence, expecting that eventually the return on investment would be a family that actually saw me. Buying this lake house was my final deposit. It was the ultimate audit. I had put everything on the table to see if they were capable of solvency. I wanted to see if, given everything they ever wanted, they would finally have enough room in their hearts to include me. I looked at the spreadsheet. Columns of dates, amounts, and emotional expenditures. The $300,000 inheritance I liquidated. The $150,000 of my own savings I injected into renovations. The months of labor. Then I looked at the new entry I had to make tonight. I typed in the date. Under the description column, I typed grand opening party. Under the cost column, I didn't type a dollar amount. I typed total erasure. I hit enter. The formula calculated the bottom line. The account was overdrawn. They were insolvent. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of a happy family. I had paid the dividends on their happiness while they siphoned off my self-worth to fund Brittany's ego. But tonight, they had made a fatal accounting error. They assumed I was a limitless resource. They assumed my love was a subscription they could renew without ever paying the fee. They were wrong. I closed the laptop. The darkness returned to the car, but now it didn't feel lonely. It felt strategic. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't a victim crying in the driveway. I was the bank. And when a borrower defaults this badly, when they prove they have no intention of honoring the contract, the bank does not ask for an apology. The bank does not beg for better treatment. The bank initiates foreclosure. I put the car in gear. I didn't drive away. I drove forward. I turned off the headlights but left the engine idling. The heat blasted against my cold hands, a stark contrast to the memory that washed over me. It wasn't a memory of a specific day, but of a feeling. The feeling of being wanted. It started 3 years ago with a death and a debt. When my grandmother Rose passed, she didn't leave her estate to her son, my father. She knew better. She left me a dilapidated commercial lot in downtown Traverse City and a trust containing exactly $300,000. She told me in a letter I still keep in my safe deposit box to build something that could not be taken away. My parents, on the other hand, had built a monument to bad decisions. Specifically, they had leveraged their entire retirement to fund my sister Brittany's failed attempt at becoming a lifestyle influencer. When the brand imploded, it left a crater of debt totaling $450,000. They were facing bankruptcy. They were facing the humiliation of losing their country club status. That was when the dynamic shifted. For 25 years, I had been the invisible child, but suddenly I was the most important person in their world. They didn't come to me demanding money. They were smarter than that. They initiated what I now call the honey trap. It started with Sunday dinners, actual invitations, not afterthoughts. My mother started asking about my work as a forensic accountant, nodding with feigned interest as I explained asset tracing. My father called me the smart one. They created a vacuum of warmth and pulled me right into the center of it. I wasn't naive. I knew logically that their affection was directly correlated to my solvency. But when you have starved for 20 years, you do not check the ingredients of the meal you are served. You just eat. I realized later during my therapy sessions that to a narcissist, love is not an emotion. It is a currency used to purchase a supply. In this case, I was the supply. Their kindness wasn't fake in their minds. It was the necessary down payment to access my capital. They were investing in me, so I would invest in them. And it worked. I liquidated Grandmother Rose's trust. I sold the commercial lot, and then because the lake house they wanted, this sprawling cedar estate, was out of their price range, even with the inheritance, I reached into my own savings. I injected $150,000 of my own hard-earned money into the project. $450,000 total. That was the price of admission to my own family. I sat them down at the closing table. I remember my father's hands shaking as he held the pen. I told them I would buy the house. I would pay for the renovations. I would let them live there rent-free for the rest of their lives, so they could maintain their image. But there was one condition. The deed stayed in my name. My father had laughed then, a booming, jovial sound. Of course, Lauren, you're the financial genius. We trust you. He had hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. My mother had cried and told me I had saved them. For 6 months, while the renovations were underway, I was the golden child. I was the savior. I thought I had bought my way in. I thought I had finally paid the balance on my existence. I looked up at the house, now glowing in the night. I realized I hadn't bought a home. I had leased a fantasy. And tonight the lease was up. They had taken the keys, changed the locks, and invited the world to celebrate their success, while the person who paid the mortgage sat in the dark. They thought the transaction was over. They thought they had extracted the value and could now discard the vendor. But they forgot one thing about forensic accountants. We always keep the receipts. I opened the car door and stepped back into the freezing night. The gravel crunched under my boots, sounding like gunfire in the silence. I walked up the driveway past the rows of luxury SUVs and sedans belonging to my parents' friends, people who had never worked a 14-hour audit in their lives. I reached the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and the noise hit me first. The hum of conversation, the clinking of expensive glassware, the jazz playlist I had curated months ago for a housewarming I thought I would be hosting. The heat rushed out to meet me, smelling of cedar, expensive perfume, and the catering I had paid for. I stood in the entryway, brushing snow from my coat. For a moment, no one noticed me. They were too busy admiring the vaulted ceilings and the hand-scraped hardwood floors. I watched them touch my walls. I watched them drink my wine. Then my mother saw me. Christina didn't smile. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the room to see if anyone else had noticed the intruder. She crossed the room in 3 strides, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She didn't hug me. She gripped my elbow, her nails digging in sharp enough to bruise. "You are late," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "And look at you. You look like you just came from a funeral." I looked at her. "I am just here for the audit, Mother." She didn't hear me. She was already steering me toward a dark corner, away from the light, away from the guests. "Listen to me, Lauren. Brittany is having a fragile night. She needs this. Do not make this about you. Do not go around telling people about your little contribution. It confuses them. Just grab a drink and smile." My little contribution. $450,000 was a little contribution. Before I could respond, the room went silent. The sharp ting-ting-ting of a spoon against crystal cut through the air. My father Robert stood by the massive stone fireplace. He looked the part of the patriarch, perfectly tanned, silver-haired, radiating the confidence of a man who has never faced a consequence he couldn't charm his way out of. He held up a hand, silencing the room. "Friends, family," he began, his voice thick with performative emotion. "You all know the last few years have been a challenge. The market is a beast. But the Hendersons do not quit. We regroup. We invest. And tonight I am proud to say that my investment strategy has paid off." A ripple of polite applause. I stood frozen in the corner, watching him steal my labor in real time. But he continued, gesturing to where Brittany sat on a velvet ottoman, looking tearful and radiant. A legacy is nothing if you don't share it. Brittany, sweetheart, come here. My sister walked to him. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. She always did. That was her job. Brittany, we know things have been hard since the divorce. We know you need a fresh start. So your mother and I have a surprise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They weren't for the main house. They were for the guest lodge, a separate 2-bedroom A-frame on the edge of the property that I had renovated specifically to be a rental income source to cover the property taxes. We are gifting you the guest lodge, Robert announced. Permanently. It is yours. A deed in your name will be drawn up next week. You will never have to worry about a roof over your head again. The room erupted. People cheered. Brittany shrieked and threw her arms around his neck. You're the best daddy in the world, she sobbed. I watched my mother wipe a tear away. I watched the guests raise their glasses to Robert's generosity. They were celebrating a theft. He was gifting property he did not own to a daughter who had never paid a bill in her life right in front of the woman who held the deed. The audacity wasn't just insulting, it was criminal. I looked at my father basking in the applause. He looked right at me. He didn't wink. He didn't look ashamed. He looked through me as if I were a ghost haunting his triumph. That was the mistake. He thought I was a ghost. He forgot I was the landlord. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder. The plastic tab felt cool and sharp against my thumb. The time for observation was over. It was time to present the findings. I walked out of the shadows. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, the hand-scraped oak I had selected, the floor I had paid for, cutting through the applause like a gavel striking a desk. Actually, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the vaulted room. I think there has been a clerical error. The applause sputtered and died. Heads turned. My father's smile froze, trapped between triumph and panic. My mother stepped forward, her hand raised as if to physically push the words back into my mouth. Lauren, not now, she hissed, a desperate smile plastered on her face for the guests. We can talk about this later. We are done talking, I replied not to her but to the room. We are now auditing. I walked past my mother. I walked past Brittany, who was still clutching the keys to the guest lodge like they were a winning lottery ticket. I walked straight to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the stone fireplace, the focal point of the room. I pulled the HDMI cable from the media console. The smooth jazz playlist cut out instantly. The room plunged into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, his voice cracking. "You are ruining your sister's night." "I am correcting the record," I said calmly. I plugged the cable into my laptop. The screen flickered for a second, blue static reflecting in the guests' confused eyes. Then the image resolved. It wasn't a slideshow of family memories. It was a high-resolution PDF. Title Warranty Deed. Grantee Lauren Henderson. The text was blown up to 4 feet tall. My name in black and white hovering over my father's head like a guillotine. "You mentioned your investment strategy, Dad," I said, turning to face the crowd. I didn't look at him. I looked at his friends, the bankers, the country club board members, the people whose validation he craved like oxygen. "I think your investors deserve full transparency." "Turn it off," my mother shrieked, lunging for the laptop. I stepped between her and the computer. "Sit down, Mother," I said. It wasn't a request, it was an order. The authority in my voice, the cold, flat tone of someone who holds all the leverage, stopped her in her tracks. She looked at me stunned. She had never heard that tone from her useful daughter before. I turned back to the guests. "My father did not buy this house with shrewd market moves," I explained, pointing to the screen. "He bought it with $0 down, because he didn't put a cent into it." I clicked the next slide. A spreadsheet appeared. The Hendersons were facing Chapter 7 bankruptcy 3 years ago. Not because of the market, but because they leveraged their entire retirement to fund Brittany's lifestyle brand, which, as you can see here, defaulted on $450,000 of debt. A gasp rippled through the room. Brittany dropped the keys. They clattered loudly on the floor. To save their reputation, I continued my voice clinical. I liquidated the $300,000 inheritance my grandmother Rose left to me, specifically to me, not them. I then injected another $150,000 of my own forensic accounting earnings to purchase and renovate this property. I looked at my father. He was gray. He looked smaller, deflated, like a balloon pricked by a needle. So I concluded, gesturing to the room. "When Robert says we bought this house, he means I bought it. And when he gifts the guest lodge to Brittany, he is gifting property he does not own to a woman who is currently insolvent on land that belongs to me." I unplugged the laptop. The screen went black, but the image of the deed seemed burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. "Enjoy the champagne," I said into the silence. "I paid for that too." "But we're family," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking as she tried to rally the room. "Lauren, honey, this is just a misunderstanding. Your father meant we in the spiritual sense. It's family money. It belongs to all of us." Robert latched onto this lifeline like a drowning man. He puffed his chest out, trying to regain the physical space he'd lost. "Exactly. Your mother is right. You're twisting words to humiliate your sister. I made the investment decisions. I managed the renovation. Just because your name is on a piece of paper for tax purposes doesn't mean you get to dictate how we live. This is our retirement home. We agreed." "We did agree," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. "We agreed this house was a sanctuary for your retirement. A quiet place for you to age in peace. That was the condition of my investment. No business ventures. No schemes." I looked at Brittany. She was trembling, but not from fear, from rage. She looked like a child who had been told the candy store was closed. "But you couldn't help yourselves, could you?" I walked back to the laptop. "Because a sanctuary doesn't pay for Brittany's lifestyle. A retirement home doesn't cover the lease on a Range Rover or the credit card bills from a failed influencer career." "I don't know what you're talking about," Robert spat, though his eyes were darting toward the exit. "Let's see if the guests know what I'm talking about." I hit the next key. The image on the screen changed. It wasn't a spreadsheet this time. It was a screenshot of a website everyone in the room recognized. Airbnb, listing title, The Lakeside Manor, Ultra Luxury Retreat. Host Brittany H. Price $2,500 per night. The room gasped collectively. This wasn't just a breach of trust. It was a breach of reality. The guests looked around the room, realizing that the retirement home they were celebrating was actually a hotel they were currently trespassing in. "You haven't just been stealing credit," I said, pointing to the screen where a calendar showed the house was booked solid for the next 6 months. "You have been operating an illegal commercial enterprise on a property zoned for residential use. You have been renting out the main house, my house, every weekend I wasn't here." I clicked again. A bank transfer record appeared. And the income, it didn't go to the mortgage. It didn't go to property taxes. It went directly into an LLC registered to Brittany. "You hacked us," Brittany screamed, finally finding her voice. "That is my business. I manage the property. I earned that money." "You earned nothing," I countered, my voice rising just enough to silence her. "You are renting out a property you do not own. That is called fraud, Brittany. And Dad, you know what happens when you run a commercial hotel on a property insured only for private residential use?" Robert went pale. He knew. He had been an insurance salesman in the 80s. "It voids the policy," I said, answering for him. "If one of these guests had slipped on the dock, if there had been a fire, I would be liable. I would be bankrupt. You risked my entire financial future, my career, my assets, my freedom, so Brittany could pretend to be a mogul." I looked at the crowd. The bankers were checking their watches. The country club board members were inching toward the door. They knew the smell of liability, and it reeked in here. "This isn't a family dispute," I said, closing the laptop with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. "This is criminal negligence. This is fraud. And I am the only thing standing between you and a lawsuit." My mother slumped onto the velvet ottoman, covering her face with her hands. The facade was gone. There was no investment genius. There was no retirement sanctuary. There was just a grift, and they had been caught red-handed by the mark. "The party is over," I said. "Everyone needs to leave. Now." "You can't do this." My mother wailed, the mask of the elite hostess dissolving into the terrified face of a woman who knows she is about to lose everything. "We are your parents. You can't evict your own family." Robert joined in his voice, shaking, desperate to salvage the con. "Lauren, be reasonable. We can fix this. We can put your name on the rental agreement. We can cut you in on the profits." Even now, at the absolute end, he was trying to negotiate a deal using my own assets. He still thought I was an investor he could charm. I looked at them, really looked at them, and for a split second, a ghost of the old Lauren flickered in my chest. The daughter who wanted to be good. The daughter who had spent her entire life trying to be useful enough to be loved. "Maybe I am being too harsh," that small, weak voice whispered. "Maybe I can just take control of the rental income. Maybe we can work this out." Then I looked at the snow swirling against the glass doors, and the cold reality hit me like a physical blow. What if I hadn't kept the deed? I let the scenario play out in my mind, vivid and terrifying. If I had been the good daughter 3 years ago, if I had signed the paperwork they pressured me to sign, I would be standing in this room right now watching my father gift my house to my sister, and I would have zero legal recourse. I would be $450,000 in the hole, bankrupt, homeless, and erased. They wouldn't have hesitated. They wouldn't have felt a shred of guilt as they watched me drive away into the freezing night. They would have laughed and poured another glass of champagne. That thought didn't just kill my guilt, it incinerated it. I wasn't evicting my parents. I was surviving them. I am being reasonable, I said, my voice as cold as the lake outside. I am giving you 1 hour to pack your personal effects. After that, I am calling the sheriff to remove trespassers from my property. You wouldn't, Brittany sneered, though she was already backing away toward the stairs, clutching her purse like a shield. I am a forensic accountant, Brittany, I replied, staring her down. I make a living finding hidden rot and cutting it out. Do not test me. The guests scrambled for the exits, muttering apologies and dodging eye contact, desperate to distance themselves from the fraud. My parents and sister ran upstairs, no longer the masters of the manor, just squatters scattering before the law arrived. 1 hour later, the house was silent. The only sound was the wind howling against the glass. I stood in the center of the living room. It should have felt like a victory lap. I owned it all. The view, the furniture, the hand-scraped floors. But as I looked around, I realized I couldn't stay here. The air was thick with their entitlement. Every corner smelled of their fraud. This wasn't a home. It was a crime scene where my trust had been murdered. I didn't move in. I didn't spend a single night there. The next morning, I called a realtor. The market in Traverse City was exploding. A cash buyer picked up the property 2 weeks later for a significant profit over what I had originally paid. I took the check to the bank. I paid off my own student loans in full. I funded a new retirement account that no one knew about. And then I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and opened my phone. 3 missed calls from Dad. A long, rambling text from Mom about forgiveness and how family is everything. A venomous message from Brittany, calling me a monster for ruining her life. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I simply opened the settings, scrolled down to their names, and hit block. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. The ledger was finally balanced. The account was closed. If you've ever had to close the account on a toxic relationship to save your own sanity, share this story. You are not an ATM, and you are not alone.